Welcome to the deep dive. So if you are launching something new, maybe an organization, a ministry, a community group, or perhaps you're looking to kind of reset the culture where you are now, well, this deep dive is definitely for you. We're really getting into it today, wrestling with that foundational DNA of a community. The absolute non-negotiables, the values you have to establish right at the start. We've been digging through some fascinating source material that gives a really clear blueprint. It draws heavily on the book of Acts, actually. And the thing that jumps out, maybe the uncomfortable truth, is that culture isn't something you bolt on later, like some kind of software update. It's being decided right now in what the material calls those fragile, unseen days right at the very beginning.
That's exactly right. It's not a nice to have you get to after you've sorted the funding or hit your growth targets. What's really striking in these sources is how clearly they lay out the stakes involved, that early period. It's described as both exhilarating and dangerous. Exhilarating because, well, every little decision, every shared prayer, how leaders act, it all shapes the identity in profound ways. But also dangerous because if you, as a leader, miss that really narrow window, you inevitably end up inheriting patterns, often unintentional ones. And these patterns, this is a quote we kept hitting, they take years of struggle to undo. So, yeah, our mission here is to unpack that blueprint for you to help you embed the right code right from day one.
Okay, let's unpack that core idea then. Why is the very beginning so critical? I mean, if I'm launching something, wouldn't my first priority be, the immediate stuff, strategy, mission statement, finding a space? Doesn't the culture sort of follow success?
That sounds logical, right? Especially for maybe a business perspective. But it fundamentally misunderstands how group health really works, especially in communities of faith or purpose.
Yeah.
What became really clear from this material is that culture acts like this invisible force of DNA. It's a code. It's not just coincidence. You could have the most beautiful mission statement up on the wall, but if the underlying code, the lived reality, says, actually, we value comfort over making a real contribution, well, comfort wins every single time. And this internal code, these embedded values, they become incredibly hard to reverse once they're set. It's like compounding interest, but for behaviors. Those tiny compromises you might make early on, or the healthy habits you manage to build, they become massive force multipliers down the road.
Wow. So, okay, not being intentional doesn't mean you get a neutral culture. It means you actually get negative defaults.
Yeah, precisely. That's the warning here. If leaders aren't proactively, intentionally planting these core biblical values, the sources say the DNA just defaults. It defaults to things like selfishness, complacency, or factionalism. Human nature finds a path, right? And that lack of early intention, it risks, as the material puts it pretty sharply, building on sand.
I like that the blueprint connects this idea, this DNA concept, way back, not just starting with Acts, but looking at the earliest scriptures. They mention God's covenant with Abraham, Genesis 12, as a powerful example. How does that fit into this culture idea?
Well, think about it. That covenant wasn't just, here's some land. It was, as the sources frame it, a DNA blueprint. God established specific values and behaviors right then and there. Radical faith, immediate obedience, being willing to step out into the unknown. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were embedded actions that shaped a people's identity for generations. It set the code for relationship, for trust.
Okay, that makes sense. And then fast forwarding to the New Testament, Jesus essentially do the same thing with his first followers.
Absolutely. The Sermon on the Mount is a prime example. It's way more than just ethical teaching. It's like the foundational charter for the kingdom's culture. The Beatitudes, how to pray, turning the other cheek, these were the initial cultural seeds. They encoded what it meant to be a follower. He was setting the priorities, the cultural DNA, before that big explosion of growth at Pentecost.
Right. Okay, this is where it gets really practical for someone listening. What are the specific actionable values, the ones that need planting early for a thriving community? The sources pull out seven essentials, really, derived from that early church experience in Acts.
Yeah, these are the core codes, the things that make the difference between just a group of people showing up and a truly unified, mission-driven community. First, and this is non-negotiable, is Christ-centeredness. It's the absolute center point, the magnetic north, if you like. Every decision, how you handle conflict, the programs you run, everything has to pivot around Jesus, his person, his teaching. Colossians 3.17 is the touchstone. Do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. If that center shifts, maybe to a dynamic leader or the building itself for a specific program or even, a pet theological issue, the whole community starts to warp. Instantly.
Okay, so if Christ is the absolute center, what does that require from the leaders, the ones trying to point everyone to him?
That flows directly into the second core marker, humility and servanthood. This one's huge. And again, non-negotiable. Jesus modeled it perfectly, didn't he? The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. That's Mark 10. In those fragile early days, leaders have to be aggressively modeling sacrificial service. If any sense of entitlement or strict hierarchy, or maybe that professional distance creeps in early, you've already contaminated the code. Humility has to cascade down from the top. Otherwise, you get these rigid kind of class structures forming within the group.
That makes total sense. So once you have that leadership orientation right,
Right.
how do you make sure people actually connect authentically? Which I guess brings us to number 3, relational integrity and authenticity, koinonia.
Exactly. And this is deeper than just, being friendly on a Sunday or showing up for an event. Koinonia. It's that deep sharing of life. It involves vulnerability, real trust. Acts 2 says they were devoted to the fellowship. That means letting people see the mess, bearing burdens together, like Galatians 6 talks about. It means not making people feel like they have to present this sanitized, perfect version of themselves. If being vulnerable gets punished, even subtly early on, people just withdraw. They put up walls, and the community won't have any resilience when the pressure comes.
Yeah, that's definitely tough in our culture today, which is so individualistic. But the 4th value feels even more radical, maybe more visible: generosity and stewardship. And specifically, sacrificial generosity.
Oh, it's incredibly powerful as a cultural code because money and possessions.
Yeah.
That's where our real values tend to show up, right?
Yeah.
Acts 2.4445, it's just astonishing when you read it. Believers had everything in common, selling stuff to give to anyone who had need. Now, this wasn't some kind of mandated communism. The sources are clear on that. It was organic. It was joyful generosity bubbling up.
So why was that radical approach to economics so vital for the DNA? What did it signal?
It signaled deep interdependence. It fundamentally broke the back of that what's mine is mine mindset. See, a culture of scarcity, it breeds competition, suspicion, but a culture of radical generosity, it sends a clear message. We're family here. Our needs are met together through our shared devotion to Christ, not by each of us hoarding our own stuff.
That builds incredible trust. It builds high resilience. It's a massive cultural marker.
Okay, shifting to the sort of internal workings of the community. The 5th value is called the operating system, or the engine room in the material. That's worship and prayer, specifically awe-filled worship and prayer. Right. And the key is, these aren't just agenda items. They're not boxes to tick on a Sunday morning. They actually define the whole atmosphere. Look at Acts 1.14. Before Pentecost even happened, the disciples were joined together constantly in prayer, unquote. If prayer and worship get treated like, the opening act or just an add-on, then the culture inevitably defaults to human effort, human planning, human cleverness. But when they really are the engine room, the culture is constantly reminded that it's God-centered. It fosters dependence, awe for what he's doing, not just pride in what the group has achieved.
Makes sense. The number 6 is described as the firewall against long-term dysfunction. That's accountability.
Yeah, every healthy system needs a firewall, right? Accountability is what makes sure these values aren't just nice words on a website or a brochure. It ensures they're actually operational. It's about integrity. Galatians talks about restoring someone caught in sin and doing it gently, but also firmly. If unhealthy patterns, maybe gossip, maybe power plays, maybe ethical shortcuts, they get ignored early on, maybe because leaders want to avoid conflict or keep numbers up, those patterns just get baked in. They become institutionalized. Addressing things early, gently, but clearly preserves the integrity of the whole code.
Got it. And the final one, number 7, this seems crucial to prevent the whole thing from just becoming an inward-looking club: mission-driven mindset.
Absolutely essential. This provides the why beyond ourselves. It gives directional clarity, that outward focus. If a community only focuses on its internal health and relationships, it eventually drifts. It becomes comfortable, maybe a bit self-absorbed, starts navel-gazing. The Great Commission in Matthew 28, that constant sending out. And then you see in Acts 2.47, the Lord added to their number daily. It shows that this outward focus has to be part of the DNA right from the start. Mission channels all that passion and energy into service. It ensures the community is always looking beyond its own wall.
Wow, okay. That is a really powerful, comprehensive list. 7 DNA markers defining the blueprint. But like we said at the start, even with the clearest blueprint, the sources warn that culture gets sticky. Drift is almost inevitable, it seems. How do those unhealthy patterns actually take root? Is it like one big bad decision?
Rarely. Drift is usually much subtler than that. It's almost never a conscious choice to go off the rails. It happens slowly, incrementally, through normalization. It might start when leaders make, what seem like small ethical compromises, maybe prioritizing fundraising over complete honesty, or maybe letting someone who's really talented but frankly toxic stay in a key role without being challenged. It's that constant low-level neglect of reinforcing the core values. That's what allows the rot to set in. And we see this historically, right? The sources point to the church in Ephesus. Revelation 2 mentions them. They were praised for working hard, for their doctrinal soundness even, but they'd lost their first love. Why? Because that initial zeal, that absolute Christ-centeredness wasn't continually intentionally reinforced. They kind of got the structure right, but the spirit, the core DNA, drifted.
That's sobering. The sources gave a specific troubleshooting example, too, for a really common symptom: widespread gossip and criticism. Now, normally you'd think, okay, that's a relational problem. People need to be nicer. But the material links it deeper, saying it's a symptom of a deficiency in, what was the phrase, joyful resilience and unfiltered authenticity. Can you unpack that connection?
Yeah, that phrase really captures something important. If gossip is thriving, it tells you people are processing conflict, frustration, negativity in really unhealthy, indirect ways. They lack that unfiltered authenticity, which is the ability, the safety, really, to speak truth and love directly to the person concerned, not about them. And they also lack joyful resilience, that underlying sense of peace and contentment that comes from being centered in Christ, which allows them to handle disagreement or even offense without letting bitterness take root and spread. So gossip basically rushes in to fill the vacuum left when you don't have strong koinonia, and when Christ-centeredness isn't truly the core emotional reality.
Wow, okay. That connects a lot of dots. So the blueprint is clear. The danger of drift is real.
Yeah.
How does someone listening actually move these values from theory to action? What are the practical day-to-day things you can do to embed this DNA?
Right. It absolutely has to get practical. You need intentional practices or rhythms for what the sources call DNA reinforcement. The first and maybe the most obvious but critical is intentional leadership. Leaders must internalize these 7 values, and then they have to model them consistently, visibly. Think of Paul telling Timothy to follow his example. Leadership creates this massive multiplier effect. If a leader preaches generosity but is known to be personally stingy, or preaches humility but acts entitled, the code gets corrupted immediately. People see the disconnect.
So modeling is foundational,
Yeah.
but that has to be backed up by actual repeated practices, right?
Yep.
Not just hoping people catch on.
Absolutely. That's the second point. You have to embed rhythms that make the values unavoidable, practices that pull them out of the abstract and into lived reality. The material suggests some great examples, like regular hospitality nights. These aren't just potlucks. They're designed as a ritual to force the value of koinonia into action. Turning strangers into family around a shared table, messiness and all. Or another one, open testimony sharing, making space regularly for people to share how they're seeing God work. That kind of rhythm keeps the community's focus on God's activity, reinforcing worship and prayer, reinforcing the mission-driven mindset. Instead of just celebrating, say, attendance numbers or budget goals, it's these repeated embedded practices that really start to rewrite those default cultural settings.
Okay, that makes sense. And the third practical thing was about the words we use.
Immensely important, intentional language. The words we use constantly shape our identity, often subconsciously. So use language that echoes acts. Remind people constantly, we're a body, we're a family, we're on mission. We're not just a building or an event or an organization. And that kind of identity language keeps pointing people back to the core values, to the why.
Right. And the last practical step, this ties back to preventing that drift we talked about.
Correction. Yes. You absolutely have to address the deviations. Those unhealthy patterns, gossip, negativity, ethical lapses, whatever they are, you have to address them early. Do it gently but firmly, leaning on that value of accountability. Address it before the drift becomes systemic, before it becomes just how things are around here.
Right.
Because if you normalize toxic behavior or apathy in the first 6 months, maybe the first year, well, that's the culture you're likely stuck with for the next decade. It's that hard to change later.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener? It really feels like the core message is the health, the influence, the actual longevity of whatever community you're building. It's determined by that code, the DNA you set right at the beginning. You can't just hope for a good culture. You have to intentionally build it.
That's the synthesis, exactly. These 7 biblical values, Christ-centeredness, sacrificial generosity, relational integrity, humility, accountability, awe-filled worship, and that outward mission focus, they aren't just, abstract ideals floating out there. They are incredibly practical tools. They are the building blocks for a resilient, thriving culture. They dictate behavior, they shape decisions, they clarify priorities day in and day out.
Culture is code. So here's a thought. If someone completely new walked into your community, your organization, today, right now, what's the invisible culture they would actually feel? Would they genuinely encounter that sacrificial generosity, that authentic, vulnerable koinonia? Or would they sense something maybe a bit hollow, maybe self-focused, maybe hierarchical underneath the surface, and maybe something to really mull over as you go forward? What's one small intentional adjustment you could make now, maybe even today or this week, to actively reinforce one of these values, to prevent that slow, subtle drift towards apathy or consumerism or division 5 years down the line? Because that initial code, it's not just strategy, it's a legacy you're actually building. Thanks for diving deep with this.